Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the Schlieffen. Yes, you can get this ship entirely for free this update. At least if you've been playing the game a bit before this update. With this Journey to the North Pole event, if you acquired enough of the tokens through combat missions in the last couple of updates, Schlieffen could be yours. You can skip the entire grind. So today we're going to take a look at it, talk about what it is, and a bit of the playstyle. It may seem rather simple on the surface, full send and secondary everything to death, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. As we're going to see, you can't just W key in random battles in particular. Of course, if we find ourselves in asymmetric modes, mode shuffle, ranked game modes, brawl game modes, yeah, you can just full send it, people. But in randoms, you got to be a little bit more careful. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. The playstyle, how I like to play this ship, and where I get the most value out of it. And we're going to start with pushing up with your destroyers. Straight up, you are going to help win gunfights in those key destroyer engagements. Early on, these secondaries are going to do absolute work against this Hoffman. We have our own Hoffman. They have their own Schlieffen. And in this case, it's really not much of a fight because I'm so close to this fight where the enemy Schlieffen is not. You can't always full send pushes like this, but with our excellent concealment and speed, we can play like this a little bit more often. Certainly, if we run into carrier games or games where we're more spotted, they're more set up to farm us, this won't work. But it's really good to look for these opportunities, as Schlieffen has some of the highest DPM secondaries in the entire game. They're incredibly accurate. They fire, frankly, ridiculously fast. This poor Lucian, man. And of course, they will have really good pen. We're taking IFHE here, allowing even the small secondaries to pen 32 millimeters of armor. It's a key threshold at higher tier battleships have a lot of 32 millimeters of armor, and it's really valuable to get that full pen rather than relying on fires and shatters more often. Hydro here is not quite going to be your 6-kilometer German Hydro. 5.5-kilometer Hydro is still excellent, by the way. It's just not quite the full German Hydro that we see on Hindenburg, GK, Preußen, Z52, things like that. It's still really nice, though, for dodging those torpedoes, I'm not gonna lie. Now, the main weakness when it comes to playing Schlieffen is going to be your main guns. They are not particularly accurate or reliable. You do get battle cruiser dispersion, but 1.7 sigma, that being the tendency for those shells to go to the center of the dispersion ellipse, doesn't leave you with very accurate or consistent salvos in my experience. The other thing is, since we're so focused on secondaries and buffing them because they're so strong, they're just ridiculously powerful, we're not taking the accuracy upgrade, so we're a little more reliant on RNG when it comes to the main guns. Sometimes it'll cooperate. 420 millimeter guns do overmatch 25 millimeters of armor, even 27 millimeters of armor, which are the main thresholds on cruisers, at least some cruisers at this tier, Worcester as an example, allowing me to pinpoint the stern portion of his citadel, and we got rewarded for it. Certainly, our salvo could have just dunked into the water and gone all around his ship, but I will take it in this case. Into a broadside Montana, we're going to see the weakness of these shells. They are not the same shells we would get on a GK, for example. They have much lower pen values, so we're going to shatter even on a Montana broadside at 12 kilometers, where I don't think the GK necessarily would. So that's going to be a bit of a trade-off there. Certainly your main guns are fine. They can do very well, especially closer ranges. They have decent reload too. The fourth turret in the back there, you notice, is a 360-degree turret. So that allows you to use 3 of your guns, swapping back and forth while pushing in like this. It's really, really handy. It's very convenient. And the torpedoes, we should probably talk about those too. Certainly having these torps is a very, very nice bonus. When looking at ships like Libertad, for example, they are a little bit at the mercy of enemy ships ramming them, where the torpedoes are a really nice failsafe there. Also, really nice for extra damage around islands, for zoning, but they're quite slow on the Schlieffen, so they're more for zoning torps rather than leading a target, especially at these longer ranges. Schlieffen versus Schlieffen engagements are always rather hilarious. He's actually going to perma a couple of our torp tubes. You do have to be aware of that. German battleship torpedoes, very squishy, so oftentimes better to just make use of them before the engagement starts for real. And we're using our secondaries on the Montana, not the Schlieffen. And that's because at closer ranges, the accuracy is so good that we're still going to hit them, right? And crucially, we're going to hit them more in the superstructure. Whereas if we fully accuracy buff them with manual secondaries, they're going to pinpoint the waterline. They aim for the citadel, and that means at very close ranges, which that Schlieffen was probably still a little too far away. I probably should have or would have got more value if I had gone manual secondaries on him. You actually won't get much damage at very close range, especially when ships are more broadside to you. I have a very dumb, in fact, maybe the dumbest fight I've ever had in World of Warships. Schlieffen tends to do that. The ship is hilarious, and it's a lot of fun. It's funny, but a very dumb fight. At like less than 1 kilometer, I'll be chasing a Montana around, and you'll see that I'll do massive damage and then suddenly no damage with the secondaries when it hits his belt armor. That's towards the end of this video. But for now, at longer ranges, yeah, it's just absolutely melting this Montana. That extra secondary pen is amazing. And a great example this game where we timed our push. We didn't get overly aggressive, but we still impacted that destroyer engagement. And let's be honest, that was a bit of a blowout. So in those situations, yeah, I suppose when you're winning that much, it's fine to push spawn. Most of the time, though, you know me, I will not be advising anybody be pushing spawn. It's really oftentimes a great way to lose the match. Moving on, what happens if you just full send anyway, ignoring the advice and just try to give it a go? Sometimes it'll work. I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes it will just work. But in this case, you're going to see why or what happens when you try to full send where you probably shouldn't. Smolensk is really, really bad for us over here, certainly. Montana as well as Los Andes could be scary. This ship does not have the best armor. It has very good armor, but it does not have the best armor. So Monty's going to get some very good salvos into us, even when we're angled, as well as just having a little bit lower HP pool. So along with that battle cruiser dispersion table we get, not the best Sigma, but we do get the battle cruiser dispersion table, we get a bit of that lower HP pool too, relative to some of those higher tier or same tier battleships. So even with this brand new HP flag, we still don't even have 80k HP, which is good enough for most games. But if you're full sending like this, it evaporates rather quickly. Broadside Montana, and we get overpens. We're angling reasonably well to this Monty, and he's still getting good pens into us. That's kind of that weird Schlieffen armor. Sometimes it does very well, sometimes it does not. And I'm greeting here to get into the cap, the Thunderdome. It's not a cap, I guess. It's the Thunderdome. I really wanted to send it in to try it, but wow, did they push as well? And you're not a one-man army, as much as it looks like it. There we go. Citadel, we get the torp hits on the Montana. We do get up to nearly 100,000 damage, but we also die. So that's what happens when you full send. It's a good example just to show you how powerful it is, even in those scenarios, but you're still not getting the most value out of the ship. It doesn't really want to give up all of its life initially, because you actually have some very good consumables for more drawn-out engagements, specifically when it comes to your damage control. It has limited charges, much like we see on the Russian battleships. Triple Citadel into a Yoshino? Maybe not the most impressive, since Yoshino does have a very large citadel, and broadside stationary at that range. Maybe I should expect good damage like that, but given some of the salvos I had while recording, I was very happy when I got that. Secondaries will be finishing him off there. But these damage controls are just so nice for dealing with the consistent HE spam we see in this game, and dealing with fires in particular. This is a ship that is not going to burn out to fires very often. You'll often have that experience when you're playing a GK, for example, or a lot of other battleships, but these fast cooldown damage controls, even though they're limited in charges, are excellent for dealing with a lot of HE spam. So Schlieffen doesn't have to worry about that quite as much. The downside is you don't have as much healing. So this ship comes with 3 heals base. If we take things like Superintendent, I forget what it's called now, the 4-point skill for extra heals, that does give us 4 heals, which I do think you want to be taking on this ship. It also gets us up to 5 damage controls, which is, again, very valuable. The downside, though, is you got to make a choice. Do you want manual secondaries? Do you want the extra heal and damage control? Do you want concealment? Do you want fire prevention? It's a bit of a pick 3 out of those 4, and unfortunately, this ship wants all of the above. So that's kind of the downside to this ship. You have to choose. And I'm usually choosing to drop fire prevention. I know. Fire prevention seems like one of the best picks for any battleship. But that's where I think this damage control can help you out to deal with those extra fires that you're going to receive. You won't burn out quite as much as someone like a normal battleship, even with fire prevention. I do find myself not very often having those long duration permafires on this ship, just because we can deal with them so well. You don't want to be damage controlling single fires, especially if you're not taking fire prevention on this ship, but waiting for that double fire isn't too bad. In this case here, we're actually getting rushed by a Z-52. Little bit awkward that, especially since our hydro is down. You notice I used that hydro a little bit early in this game. Maybe a bit too early, but I was worried about the Yoshino and whatever destroyer was in the B cap there actually torping me as I crossed this gap. This is a very aggressive position to take. But when we're not fighting carriers, I mean, there's some hybrids in this, which is a bit annoying, but when we're not fighting carriers in particular, we can push up to some of these islands where we're concealed. It's a large rock that's going to prevent people from arcing over it to farm us down rather quickly. And it forces enemies to make plays like this, which they probably shouldn't, but I mean, hey, people will sometimes just rush at you to try and deal with the Schlieffen that is so close to the cap. And that's a mistake that you can then punish. The problem, though, is in those carrier games, the carrier is just going to come drop you over and over and over again. Schlieffen does not have good AA. Not many ships do. In fact, almost no ships have good enough AA to really do any sort of aggressive plays in carrier games. But Schlieffen in particular does struggle quite a bit more. So you'll notice a lot of these games do not contain carriers, and that is no coincidence. There's good reasons for that. Victoria deciding to push up a little bit, as well as this Chikuma 2. Very tough time here to deal damage to this Chikuma 2. Unfortunately, we are struggling here to actually land a good hit on that cruiser. But you're going to notice in this position in particular, our ability to deal with multiple flanks at once. That's a real key strength of Schlieffen, especially when we start to look at things like ranked battles or any sort of Brawl, closer range game modes. This is a great example of what you can do in those game modes much more often, where you're pushing, focused on a cap, you're focused on the target of priority. In this case, the Victoria broadside is a little bit more important, I think, trying to take him out before he reverses around the island. But we also have the secondaries available for Victoria or this Chikuma 2, or the Chikuma 2 in the B cap. We can deal with multiple targets on multiple sides of our ship. And that's what makes it so incredibly dangerous in something like ranked, allowing you to focus that destroyer when he pops up on the opposite flank of where your guns are located. Sure, the turret traverse isn't bad. The 360 turrets will help you in those situations. The maneuverability will also help you in those situations. But the ability to deal with targets on all fronts, no matter what scenario you're in, is really nice, at least at those closer ranges. Chikuma 2 does finally take that citadel. There it is. It takes a few tries, but Schlieffen will get there. Not always going to give you those dev strike salvos, but that battle cruiser dispersion is nice. They did not need to give this ship battle cruiser dispersion. The secondaries are already so extreme on this thing, and it is a nice bonus to have. The weaker shells means less against cruisers as well. That less pen value doesn't matter quite as much. We'll also take out the Victoria. There we go. And a pretty successful flank. I had Malta helping me out. Certainly, that is a massive bonus if you can play in a div. Certainly with a div mate as strong as Malta is. That's a bit of a cheat code in itself, I will say. If you haven't, definitely go check out Malta's channel. Excellent CC for this game. Chikuma is reversing. His smoke is out, though, so time to push. We've done over 170,000 damage in this one and over 2 million potential damage. So there's some thought to maybe give up some skills, even Adrenaline Rush perhaps, to take the 3-point skill. I'll talk about the commander a little bit more, but this is a build I've been experimenting with. I did not play it here in this video, but I have been experimenting with giving up Adrenaline Rush on these secondary battleships. We already have more than enough DPM, right? These secondaries just absolutely melt people regardless of what we're doing. So we want to stay alive. And what if we take fire prevention, concealment, manual secondaries, secondary range, and the 3-point skill for faster cooldown heals and the extra heal at 2 million potential damage. That way we get up to our maximum heals in the games where we need it, which are like this, where I'm out of heals, as you can see. Giving us that extra heal would be nice. And we do miss out on some very free Adrenaline Rush DPM. But does a ship like Schlieffen need more DPM yet? It is nice, don't get me wrong. 85,000 secondary damage in this one. Absolutely insane. But I don't know. It's what I've been experimenting with. Perhaps not the best build to go for, but it is worth talking about, I think, considering how powerful these ships are, especially at these closer ranges. And now to maybe the dumbest engagement I've had in this game in a very long time. Dumb in a good way, by the way, just funny. It's very rare that I get these engagements these days. People tend to play pretty far back. I'm sure you've noticed that. But in this case, we're going to be chasing a Montana around. First, we got to deal with this Bourgogne, though. And this poor Bourgogne has really no chance. This is IFHE secondaries, 2 Schlieffens. I'm not sure if the other guy has IFHE secondaries, but for us, any of these shells that hit pretty much are going to full pen. If we hit the turrets, if we hit the belt, maybe not. But yeah, this is what happens when you have 32 millimeters of armor everywhere against a Schlieffen at close range. It is scary. It is very, very scary. I also want you to notice my angling here, trying to angle to the Montana perfectly well, bow in like this, while also shooting at the Bourgogne. Our Schlieffen's actually going to go down, our friendly there. So perhaps we didn't take as much damage because they were all focused on him, but he was sitting broadside. Schlieffen can take citadels. It does not have a turtleback. So sailing broadside, I know I got away with it a little bit in some of these earlier games too, but you are at risk of taking citadels. It's a little odd because it should take more citadels since it doesn't have turtleback. And it is a waterline citadel. I have a tough time citadeling this ship all the time. Here's a great example where we take some hits from the Monty, but I don't think that was any citadels. He got pretty unlucky there to not actually be able to citadel me. I don't know why. Schlieffen is a bit of an enigma in that case, where it shouldn't be as tanky as it is on paper, and yet in practice, it just doesn't eat these citadels. Shimakaze launched 2 out of his 3 torp racks, so we got to be a little bit careful now, as he's probably lining up another one for us. But our Shiba takes him out. Very, very fortunate. And now, may I present to you 32 millimeter overmatch secondaries, or pen secondaries, into the Montana stern, where every shell will hit, basically. Look at the damage. It's ridiculous. I'm going to miss these torpedoes, by the way. This is just straight up not predicting well. Of course, he's going to turn to shoot me. And yeah, I just totally whiffed them. That was so bad. But notice how our damage drops off to do absolutely nothing. We're doing 0 damage with these secondaries right now while they're hitting his belt armor. Look at that. 0, 0, 0, 0. Like, no damage numbers are even popping up. So this is a situation where if he's angled like this, I probably don't want manual secondaries. I want the secondaries to have worse dispersion, so then they can sometimes jump up into his superstructure or upper belt, for example. But when he angles to me, suddenly the damage is back. What a stupid engagement. It's so fun. I wish this kind of thing happened more often in random battles. It's certainly something that you can do a little more often at low tier. High tier is a little bit more passive these days, but it's always fun when it happens at high tier. And certainly in ranked game modes, Brawl game modes, that's where you're going to find these sorts of engagements more often. So if you do go for the Schlieffen, which I highly recommend, it's a very fun, silly ship, definitely take a look at ranked or brawls or asymmetric modes. I suppose we also have operations these days too at higher tier. That can be a good option as well. It's just silly fun is what this ship is. Now, we're not going to win this game, unfortunately, but that was a lot of secondary hits. It's just fun, man. It really is just a fun ship to play in World of Warships. I gotta say, we probably should have taken more damage to that Montana, especially at those closer ranges. Sometimes I was not angling properly. Should have taken more Citadel damage, but that's where this armor sometimes works out incredibly well. Schlieffen is just tankier than it seems a lot of the time. It's no Libertad. It does not have the acceleration maneuverability like the Libertad line has. It doesn't have the armor values that the Libertad line does have. But it has torpedoes, certainly, as well as secondaries that fire faster, even if they don't do as much damage, certainly to some of these ships. The Libertad has 59 mil pen on its large caliber secondaries, which allows you to get through even more battleship armor. Some of the deck armor will see icebreakers even in this game. Yeah, Libertad can punch through that, where Schlieffen can't quite. Also, Libertad gets a pretty insane F key, where Schlieffen does not have that. This one has torpedoes, though. It's certainly last year's model of secondary battleship, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Schlieffen is still incredibly powerful, and in a lot of ways can do a little bit more than Libertad thanks to these torpedoes at closer ranges, especially if I don't whiff them. Still a very, very fun ship to play, and well worth getting if you're interested in battleships, brawling, secondary battleships, and you manage to complete this expedition to the North Pole event. If you're unsure where to get these ships, you can just go here to the gift selection. It'll look like a cube of snow or almost cube of snow until you click to receive your gift. And if you got to tier 10, then you can only select tier 10s. If you didn't get to tier 10, maybe you're a newer player or just haven't played the game in a long time, it's only the tier 8s that are available to you. You're cut off on either side. A little odd, that choice, perhaps. Would have been interesting to see the option, even if you got far enough in the event, to maybe choose a tier 8 if you wanted a tier 8 of a certain line more. But otherwise, a very, very good event, I gotta say. Getting you into some very, very fun tier 10 or tier 8 ships. Carbon a little less so, but the rest are very, very interesting in my opinion. As for that build, I am using a pretty standard build here with Schlieffen. Even with preventative maintenance, you'll notice those torpedo tubes do still get knocked out, which feels kind of bad, but the secondaries stay alive a little bit more. You kind of have to make that choice, but I think the secondaries typically are doing more damage overall, so we'll let the torps die every once in a while. They won't always get knocked out, but it's relatively common these days. The secondaries do want IFHE. These smaller caliber secondaries only have 26 millimeters of pen without IFHE, which does bump them up to 32. So pretty valuable. Even though it cuts your fire chance in half, it's still worth taking in my opinion. Long range secondaries, we need that 12.5 kilometers of range, as that is basically our concealment. That's the power of extra range secondaries and concealment on this ship. Manual secondaries is a must in my opinion, if you're going for this ship and these types of builds. That extra heal, that extra damage control is extremely valuable. Concealment, extremely valuable for that same reason. No fire prevention. The problem with doing that hypothetical build where we remove Adrenaline Rush, we take Improved Repair Party Readiness, we remove Emergency Repair Expert. Wow, can't talk this morning, sorry. Emergency Repair Expert is what it's called. I gotta try and remember that instead of Superintendent. That's what it used to be called. Take Fire Prevention. But then we lack that 5th damage control. This will only give us that 4th heal some games. I'm not sure if that's worth it. So on Schlieffen, I do tend to stick to this build since those fast acting damage controls do, there's no equipment tab still. Whoops. Here we go. Still a bit awkward, this port, certainly. And those fast acting damage controls, 38-second reload time, really, really nice for dealing with those fires. That heal is a just standard heal. So standard duration, standard cooldown time. No fast action here like we see on like the Massachusetts, Ohio, Georgia, those kinds of things. And 5.5 kilometer hydro, very, very nice. Speaking of Libertad, it's really nice to have a hydro. Libertad is fine because of its insane maneuverability. But I think it would be interesting if they nerfed Libertad to not have that insane maneuverability. It was still really strong before they added that maneuverability, by the way. Doesn't really need it. And without a Hydro, then it would be much easier to land torps on that ship, which may make it a little more balanced. We'll see. But Schlieffen, the older version, is certainly extremely powerful still and well worth getting. A very, very fun ship. I was going full secondary madness here. I think that's how I want to play this ship. I'm not going to play this ship for main guns. That's why I'm not going main battery mod 3. That's why I'm not going aiming systems mod 1. If I was to do that, a more hybrid version, why am I not just playing a battleship that is better with its main guns? Right? That's kind of how I view it. Obviously, I'm someone who has all these ships anyway, so I can afford to do that. That's a bit of a longer duration, someone who's played the game a long time take. But if you're newer, maybe if you want to try main guns, you can. Still, though, I think this ship was built to just full send the secondaries and their damage. Main armaments mod 1 would certainly keep our torps alive much more, but then the secondaries start breaking much more. So a bit of a trade-off there. Nice roof we get to look at here. Some of these camera angles. Okay, I won't roast the port too much more. That is the video, though, on the Schlieffen. A very, very good pickup for free. If you've been playing the game over the last couple of updates, you probably got to tier 10. So well worth getting as a battleship. If you're interested in the battleship, this is a great choice. So thank you very much for watching and have a great rest of your day.